Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Replay Media. Today, we'll be recapping the second season of Loki that's causing such a sensation among fans. But first, don't forget to subscribe and comment. Not only because you'll have fun on this channel, but also because you can enter a giveaway for a PS5 or Xbox Series X. Just by commenting and subscribing, you'll participate in the giveaway, and the winner will choose the prize. Good luck, and let's get started with the recap. The second season starts directly with the end of the past, when Loki ended up by accident in the TVA of the past, where nobody recognizes him and there are statues of He Who Remains everywhere. Suddenly, Loki is out of time and back in the present. It doesn't take long to deduce what's happening to him, but he can't find a way to stop it. In the wake of Judge Renslayer's disappearance, General Dox and Judge Gamble become the highest authorities at TVA. While B-15 and Mobius talk to them in the war room, Loki is in the same place, though in the past, where there's a mural of He Who Remains. Both Dox and Gamble disagree with the continued growth of the temporal branches, as it was their duty to prune them. Thanks to last season's revelations, B-15 explains to them that they were all variants and were plucked from their lives to work at TVA. Although Dox doesn't seem convinced, Gamble orders the hunters to stop pruning the temporal branches. Suddenly, Loki slips into the present to show them the mural of TVA's true creator, He Who Remains. Despite that, Dox still blames Sylvie for that mess and orders Hunter X5 to find her. Seeing Loki's strange condition, Mobius takes him to Repair and Advancement, the deepest floor of TVA and the home of Ouroboros, or OB, a very charismatic technician whom no one has visited in centuries. Of course, Loki gets out of phase and meets the OB from the past, who quickly recognizes his situation and tells him he needs a temporary aura extractor. Thanks to Loki helping him in the past, the OB of the present gets an extractor in his office. Later, they discover that the temporal loom, the container for the temporal branches of the TVA, is breaking down due to the incessant appearance of new branches. First, OB asks Mobius to go out into the temporal loom and activate the extractor, which will separate Loki from the time stream. Loki must prune himself as soon as Mobius does that to repair his time slipping. Loki is out of phase with the future. While in the present, Mobius approaches the temporal loom with an anti-radiation suit. When he manages to activate the extractor, Loki still fails to get a temporal staff, complicating his return. Then, Loki's distracted by the sight of Sylvie exiting through a broken elevator. Suddenly, someone attacks him from behind with a staff and prunes him. Thanks to that, he comes back to the present like a rocket and falls directly on Mobius, just as they close the doors of the temporal loom. After killing He Who Remains, Sylvie retreats to a branching timeline to set down roots in 1982 as a McDonald's employee. In search of Sylvie before the hunters find her, Loki and Mobius end up in 1970s London, where X5's TemPad was shut down. It turns out that X5 abandoned Dox's mission and became a famous movie actor named Brad Wolfe. As a fun fact, in the Marvel Comics, Brad Wolfe is one of the hosts of Zaniac, a demonic parasite who hails from a dark dimension. As soon as he sees Loki and Mobius, X5 runs out of the gala, only for B-15 to intercept him in an alley and take his TemPad from him. Later, X5 runs into a gang of thugs, though when he tries to beat them up, he discovers that they're illusions created by Loki. After that, Loki himself multiplies to corner the hunter, ending the chase. Back at TVA, as X5 refuses to cooperate, Loki and Mobius try to unravel the data from his TemPad. At that point, Casey informs that Miss Minutes might be working with Renslayer, which would explain her mysterious absence. That reminds Loki of a tape he heard in the past about He Who Remains and Renslayer talking as a couple. The TemPad gets more complicated for them than it should, so Loki and Mobius have no choice but to confess to X5. First, the hunter mocks Loki and his attempt to redeem himself from his bloody past. The god doesn't take it well at all, especially when he hears one of his most famous nicknames, Loser. Still, he manages to keep his cool, so X5 targets Mobius, labeling him a TVA slave who ignores his true past. While eating lemon pie to calm down, Mobius confesses that he lost control but loves his life at TVA, even if he was kidnapped. As for X5, Loki returns for a second round with a torture device that locks the hunter in a box. Gradually, the box gets smaller and smaller until he confesses that he abandoned his mission, but first found Sylvie. On the other hand, OB discovers that the gates to the temporal loom are locked, and can only be opened with a facial scan of the TVA's creator, He Who Remains. With X5 as hostage, Loki and Mobius travel to 1982, where they're reunited with Sylvie. As strained as their relationship was, Loki asks her to explain why he saw her in the future in the TVA. That's not exactly her favorite place, even though it's the only thing keeping the timeline straight. Soon after, X5 shows a lot of anxiety about being on that time branch, confessing that Dox and his loyal soldiers are secretly pruning branches. Right away, Loki, Sylvie, and Mobius find the Hunter Squad setting up a temporal bomb. The two Loki join forces again to stop the soldiers with their powers and abilities. Unfortunately, the general had already bombed many other temporal branches, killing millions of people. At that moment, Casey receives a signal from the Renslayer Tempad, while Sylvie returns home after being disappointed with the TVA. Meanwhile, Renslayer travels to 1868 Chicago in the Sacred Timeline to reunite with Miss Minutes. The AI instructs him to throw a TVA manual into the window of Victor Timely, who looks like an ordinary child, but is a variant of He Who Remains. That plan was agreed upon by He Who Remains himself when he sensed his death. Back at TVA, Loki and his team agree to find Renslayer, as she's their direct route to Miss Minutes, the only one who may have the solution to the temporal loom's failure. Loki and Mobius travel to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, where they last detected Renslayer's Tempad. During their tour of the fair, Loki's offended to see some wooden statues of Odin, Thor, and Balder, his older brother. Loki claims that no one has ever heard of Balder, but Mobius knows him as Balder the Brave. Then they see a poster of one Victor Timely presenting temporal wonders. At the display, Loki recognizes Victor Timely as a variant of He Who Remains, though this is a stuttering and rather nervous version. Despite that, he's also a genius who, with few resources, has managed to build a prototype temporal loom. Surprised by the capabilities of his device, Timely attracts the attention of Renslayer and several investors. After Timely refuses to be his partner, a baron decides to buy his machine outright. But as soon as he leaves the exhibition, the baron discovers that the invention is faulty, so he pursues Timely with his goons. Although he manages to escape from them, Timely is caught by Sylvie, who wants to kill him before he becomes He Who Remains. Loki begins to fight with her to defend the inventor, resulting in an explosion that ejects them both from the Ferris wheel. Renslayer takes advantage of the moment to pull Miss Minutes out of her bag, who increases in size to scare everyone. Amidst the chaos, Renslayer grabs Timely, who takes her to his house and shows his inventions. As he does not understand the sudden interest in his ingenuity, Renslayer and Miss Minutes explain that he is destined to become the creator of the TVA, and is the only one who can repair the temporal loom. Before accepting his mission, Timely sets off for his lab in Wisconsin to take his most important prototype, a multiplier. On the way, Timely deduces that Renslayer gave him the manual and is grateful to its writer, OB himself. Timely expresses his gratitude and tries to flirt with Renslayer, but she leaves him in the friend zone. Soon after, Renslayer wakes up on a boat, as Miss Minutes convinces Timely to kick her off the ship. In the lab, Miss Minutes confesses her feelings to Timely, lamenting that her main variant never created a real body for her to be an official partner. For obvious reasons, Timely shuts Miss Minutes down, only for Renslayer to show up with a gun. Loki and Mobius also show up, though Sylvie surprises them all with her powers, and has a free way to assassinate Timely. However, she changes her mind when she sees how terrified he is. There's no trace of He Who Remains in that look. Then, Loki and Mobius take the inventor to the TVA, while Sylvie throws Renslayer into the Citadel at the end of time. Renslayer has no choice but to reactivate Miss Minutes, who reveals that in the past she commanded the army of He Who Remains. After the multiversal war against her other versions, He Who Remains promised Renslayer that they will lead the TVA together, but then wipes her and the other employees' memories. Upon arriving at TVA, Timely complains that they've done nothing but use him as an object, though he understands the situation when he hears the loom breaking. Later, Timely meets OB and recognizes him as the creator of the manual. The funny thing is that OB admits that everything he learned was thanks to a 19th century inventor from Chicago. Guess what? He's talking about Timely, which creates a paradox of predestination. Back to the main problem. OB presents his prototype yield multiplier, based on Timely's annotations. The plan is to throw the multiplier at the temporal loom to enlarge its rings and increase its ability to accumulate temporal branches. To do this, they need a brave volunteer to approach the loom despite the increased temporal radiation. Also, OB's multiplier still doesn't work, though Timely shows him his prototype and they agree to work together to combine them. Meanwhile, in a cell, X5 tries to convince General Dox and her soldiers to escape from TVA and return to their original lives. Dox decides to ignore his words, but listens to B-15, who offers them a second chance to protect the TVA more conservatively. On the other hand, Loki tries to explain to Sylvie that they're doing something good for the living temporal branches, and that she's not wrong to spare Timely's life. Sylvie is still very doubtful, but Loki clings to hope. While the prisoners are still pondering B-15's offer, Renslayer shows up to invite them to regain control of the TVA in exchange for a normal life in the timeline. As the only one who agrees is X5, Renslayer uses the torture device to crush Dox and her soldiers inside a box. During his work on the multiplier, Timely notices Mobius's cup of hot chocolate, so a guard guides him to the machine. In a nice way, Timely gives a cup of hot chocolate to the guard, who is suddenly pruned by X5. After that, X5 takes Timely into a room with Miss Minutes and Renslayer, who ask him about his device. Just then, the loom begins to collapse, so Loki and Sylvie head off with the others. On the way, an elevator closes in front of Loki, who has no choice but to take the stairs. As Miss Minutes is jamming the elevator, Sylvie sabotages it to open it, seeing in the hallway Loki being pruned by Loki. Sounds weird, but it's exactly what we saw in the first episode from another point of view. As for the troubled Miss Minutes, OB reboots the system to disconnect her, which also disables the security protocols. In other words, Loki and Sylvie can use powers in the TVA. Thanks to that, they mind control X5 to take them to Timely and prune Renslayer. Afterwards, Timely uses a facial scanner to open the floodgates to the temporal loom. Loki offers to launch the multiplier, though Timely claims it must be him, not just because he knows how it works, but because it's his time to stop running away from trouble and be brave. And there goes brave Timely, ready to save the timeline. Oh, wait, he's been disintegrated by temporal radiation. It's over. The loom has collapsed. Everyone is dead. Well, at least that's what it looked like, because Loki survives the explosion even though he's in an empty TVA. And guess what? His time slipping is back, taking him to a near future where he tries to talk to his future version. Time shifting to the past, he continues exploring the TVA and finds the manual. As he reads it, he hears his past version saying hi, but everything begins to disintegrate. In the next scene, we see a branching timeline in 1962, where Casey is a criminal named Frank Morris, known for escaping from the infamous Alcatraz prison. Loki deflects to that place, discovering that Casey doesn't know him. After that, Loki accidentally travels to multiple timelines where his friends have their original lives. B-15 is a doctor, Mobius is a jet ski salesman, and is the father of 2 boys. On the other hand, OB is a failed writer, desperately trying to sell his books. Despite that, he doesn't freak out when he hears Loki's story. In fact, he offers to help him with his knowledge of theoretical physics. Loki asks him for help about his time slipping, to which OB replies that he can manage to control it, as he always ends up around friends. Somehow, his subconscious drives that power. He just needs a clear reason. To Loki, his mission is to save TVA, but it's not enough to faze him. OB comes up with a new idea that involves reuniting the old gang. as they all have a temporal aura that will act as coordinates for Loki to return to the moment where the loom exploded. First, they need a tempad, something this OB version doesn't know how to build, but Loki hands him the TVA manual before slipping away. At their next stop, Loki sees from afar the home of Mobius, who's dealing with his role as a father after losing his wife months ago. Of course, Mobius has no idea who Loki is, and offers him one of his jet skis. While Loki tries to convince him of the truth, OB shows up with a prototype time travel tempad. Thanks to that, and with a lot of convincing, Loki gathers his friends, although one special person is still missing, Sylvie. Like Loki, Sylvie remembers her former life, only she doesn't want to re-establish the TVA, because now everyone is enjoying their original lives. That leaves Loki thoughtful, as he wants his friends back and doesn't want to be alone. Still, Loki warns his group that they can go home and that he's wrong to gather them together. Meanwhile, in her timeline, Sylvie watches as everything begins to disintegrate. Then, Sylvie turns to Loki to admit that he was right. They must save the TVA before all timelines are destroyed. Watching his friends disintegrate, Loki goes into despair, but it helps him control his time-slipping and return to his past versions. Back in the collapsing temporal loom, Loki retries to repair it 1,000,000 times, but timely disintegrates again and again. In desperation, he tries to speed up the process, asks Miss Minutes for help, and takes centuries to study everything OB knows. Finally, his attempts pay off, when Timely manages to launch the multiplier into the loom and return in time to save himself from the radiation. It seems that the loom's rings have grown larger, but then OB realizes that more temporal branches are appearing infinitely. As you well know, it's impossible to contain the infinite. Unwilling to accept that fate, Loki returns to the Citadel at the end of time to prevent Sylvie from murdering He Who Remains, as that triggered the disaster. Of course, she fights back, despite Loki's arguments, and makes it clear that the only way to stop her is to kill her. Since Loki doesn't want to go to those lengths, he is to watch Sylvie murder He Who Remains an infinite number of times. Even He Who Remains himself realizes he's doing it, and stops time to explain his attempts are futile. The temporal loom is failsafe, and removes temporal branches that shouldn't exist to maintain the sacred timeline. The TVA? Just collateral damage. No matter what Loki does, the result is the same. He loses. Still, Loki resolves to change the equation and break the loom, even though that's the only thing that prevents a multiversal war with the other versions of He Who Remains, primarily Kang the Conqueror. As a first step, Loki returns to the past when Mobius first interviewed him. In just seconds, he made him question the whole purpose of the TVA, though Mobius acclaims that there's no comfort there. Most purposes are more burden than glory, so they must choose which burden they can best bear. Next, Loki travels back in time to converse with Sylvie, who convinces him that saving the sacred timeline will take free will away from the entire universe. For her, sometimes it's better to destroy things. Motivated by these words, Loki returns to the collapsing temporal loom to become the god his friends need. As the loom approaches, he adopts a classic Loki costume and destroys the device. Now, all the temporal branches are scattered, but Loki brings them to life with his powers, and takes them with him to the end of time. With the temporal branches and his power, Loki sits on a throne to replace He Who Remains, and becomes the new guardian of time. Now, all timelines reside in a beautiful tree resembling Yggdrasil, the Tree of Worlds from Norse mythology. Soon after, we see the TVA functioning perfectly under Loki's teachings. During his work, Mobius finds a report of a He Who Remains variant causing a disaster on Earth 616, but fortunately, Ant-Man and his allies take care of that. Beyond the fact that TVA is heading in the right direction, Mobius no longer feels comfortable and wants to know his original life. On the other hand, Little Timely never received the TVA manual, while Renslayer ends up in the void at the end of time, where the monster Alioth is waiting for her. We return to Mobius, who looks wistfully at his original life as a father, though he dares not take the step, despite Sylvie's encouragement to experience new things. Mobius just prefers to let time pass, because deep down, his real reason for working at TVA was Loki. the new god of stories. And so we come to the end of one of Marvel Studios' best series that redeemed one of its most beloved villains. Farewell, Loki. You always had a glorious purpose. We hope you liked this recap, and if so, don't forget to like and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Comment and subscribe to the Replay Media to participate in a juicy giveaway of a PS5 or Xbox Series X. Don't get sad if you don't win it. We do giveaways every month. That's all, friends. See you soon.